Good afternoon. Great. So I hope you had a good lunch and then also had a nice discussion with your major groups. Thank you for the major group who have sent their key messages. Now the drafting group will work on it. So to be presented at 5 p.m. today. And now I would like to invite Leda that will facilitate the next session, which is very important because we're going to talk about other issues in relation with UNEA 3, which includes the ministerial declaration and also the UN Environment Budget and Program. So Leda, I will give the floor to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think most of the people are still eating. Because it's emptier than this morning, but that's I think them to blame because I think this will be an interesting session. It's mostly an information session, so it's not about content because we have two people here from the UN, the Secretariat, so we cannot discuss on political issues with them, but I think they have loads of information that I think for us is very important to understand better how UNEP and UNEA works. So, as said, we are going to discuss two things. One is on the programs. UNEP has programs, has several programs, and of course has a budget. So we will be informed by Sheila Agrawal Khan on that. She's sitting next to me. And we will talk about the ministerial outcome documents. It was the last version is on the website since yesterday evening. So if you want to have a look at it, you can do it. It's uploaded there. But again, we are not going to discuss on the contents. That we will do on Thursday morning when we have a dialogue with the president of UNEA, Edgar Gutierrez. He will visit us in the green tent. That's Thursday morning. It's in the schedule that I sent you this morning, I think. So there we can have the discussion on the content of the Ministerial Outcome Declaration. But now we will have some information and some insights on how this document was drafted and maybe some extra information. I don't know what Clarice Wilson is going to tell and is able to tell us. Okay, so I start with this. So I would like to start with Sheila. Maybe you can give us some more information on which kind of programs at the moment UNEP is working on, which budgets we have, and who is making the decisions for the budget, for the programs. Is it the Secretariat? Is it the member states? And maybe also to have some insights on if you have coherence checks between the programs. Is there someone who has an overview on this? And also if there is a coherence check with other international agreements that are there, not only on the environment, because we are not so strict on only environment, but also the programs that UNDP is working on or other programs of the UN. Please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. At the last UN Environment Assembly, member states approved a program of work for UNEP for the biennium 2018-2019, along with a medium-term strategy for the period 2018-2021. So the process of developing and approving the program of work and its budget comes with a whole, you could say, 1 year to almost 18 months of discussion and consultation at very, very different levels. On the one hand, we look at our global environment outlook, our analysis of emerging issues to identify what are the key issues that we should be focusing on. We have a lot of consultations, one with the Committee of Permanent Representatives on what we think we should be focusing on in the upcoming period. We have discussions with other NGOs, we have discussions with the UN system, with partners to get feedback. And we got a lot of feedback from major groups as we went through this process of developing the program of work and the medium-term strategy. Based on the kind of results that were expected of us, we then look at the kind of budget implications this would have. We look at historical trends in the budget and the kind of income that would seem realistic, because at the end of the day, we don't have a budget that says you have a budget and, okay, you're going to get these resources. It doesn't work like that. We have a tentative budget, which is a target budget, which has a number of funding sources. The regular budget of the UN, which is a given. Once it is approved, you do get that funding. But the rest of our budget, which is about 90% of the entire budget of the organization, is all voluntary funding. Some of it, the Environment Fund, is unearmarked, and the bulk of it, which is extra budgetary resources, are earmarked from contributors to UN Environment. And so, as we go through the years, we have to mobilize that money with funding requests for what we are trying to achieve. In terms of who puts together the budget, so we present a first draft of it, and then there's a lot of consultations with member states on the kind of what are they looking at, what are they targeting. And at the last UN Environment Assembly, as I said, the budget was approved. Now, major groups have a chance to look at that program of work and budget and to provide comments into it, and we take that on board as we develop the program of work. We have in our current and in the new medium-term strategy and program of work for the organization 7 areas of focus. One is climate change, where we have a piece that looks at climate change adaptation, and then we have an element that looks at the mitigation side, so looking at energy efficiency, renewable energy, RED+, where we look at forest issues and avoiding deforestation. We have a program on disasters and conflicts where we look at both the risk reduction side and then how we can support member states when they request support for responding to a crisis, either a disaster or a conflict. We have a program on ecosystem management, which looks at how different competing needs from different sectors are dealt with. We have a program number 4 on environmental governance, which looks both at the international part of governance, but also in terms of national work, both at the legal work and compliance work, but also in terms of integrating environment into different sectoral laws and policies. We have 3 other programs in addition, chemicals and waste, which in the near future was also going to have an air quality element. We have a program on resource efficiency and sustainable consumption and production, and lastly, a program on environment under review. Once this program of work is approved in the organization, our job is to look at the kind of portfolio that needs to come together to deliver on those results. And at that point, we're looking at how do we make sure that what we do in one program complements what we do in another program. So how do we bring more coherence across all what the organization does? And as you know, UNEP is a small institution. We are 800 staff worldwide. When we count the multilateral environmental agreements that we support, we come to about 1,100 staff. Our budget for the program of work is about $600 to $700 million every 2 years. And so the only way we can have the scale of magnitude of impact that is expected of us in an environment where you have now the Sustainable Development Goals is through partnership. So the question on how do we bring coherence is because, well, we're looking to work with partners who have that expertise or can bring in other expertise which we don't have and be able to add value.
And do you also have this kind of coherence checked with other the bigger, like WTO trade agreements? Is there something you have contact with, or is it mostly that you have your partnerships with UNDP and World Health Organization, the UN bodies?
The partnerships are quite varied. We have our partnerships with the Multilateral Environmental Agreement Secretariat, some of which are hosted by UNEP. We have partnerships within the UN system, and then we also have partnership with other international institutions, the likes of the World Conservation Union, WWF, to local partners, local NGOs, and to banks. Most recently, we've got some interesting partnerships with the likes of BNP Paribas, where we're working on a tropical landscape finance facility where there is an investment opportunity for the private sector, but also with the NGOs. So, for example, in the first investment that is being made, WWF is a key player in working with Michelin Tires on how do we pull together the expertise from the private sector and the NGO world in a partnership that is with a bank.
And we are now, and last time as well, the other two UNEAs as well, we worked a lot on resolutions. I do remember that there was once a proposal, I don't know from whom it came, that it would be a good idea that on all the resolutions there would be one paragraph on the budget implication. I know that's not happening because I don't see that in the resolutions. How do the resolutions come in? Because it has budget implications, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I have to say this is a bit of a challenging issue in this organization. If you were in the UN Assembly, the biggest issue there is when a resolution is put forward, there is a consideration of what they call a program budget implication, meaning that as a resolution is being drafted, you look at the budget implications of that resolution, and ideally resolutions that go outside the agency's standard routine work gets connected to the budget needs that might go with a resolution that is over and above the program. In UN Environment, we don't have that kind of an issue. It was proposed informally as something that the UN Environment Assembly might want to look at every resolution and see whether it's part and parcel of the program of work or whether it has a budget implication that takes us beyond what is targeted in the budget for our standard program of work. One of our big challenges is, as you can see now, because we're a bit off cycle and trying to get back in the cycle of the UN, we have a program of work for the biennium 2018-19, which was already approved last year. And so we are about to start implementing a new program of work in January 2018. And we have a large portfolio that is under implementation, which has projects that run 4 or 5 years in duration. So they span over 2 programs of work, basically the medium-term strategy period. Our challenge now is that you have resolutions that will come forward, not only this time, but even for the next UNEA. And some of these fall very much within what we have planned to do within the program of work, or will be taken into consideration in the new program of work for the biennium 2020-2021. But some of them come with absolutely no consideration of budget. So when a resolution is made, it's a clear message to the organization that we do need to go and look out for resources. But of course, it's dependent on which contributors are willing to fund which resolutions and which ones will fund to the program of work. Some of it is connected and more coherent between the resolutions and the program of work, and some of it is additional to the program of work. It's something I think that hasn't yet been addressed as to how you look at the budget implications of the resolutions that come forward.
And then a last question on this topic, and then we go over to the other topic, is that this year, we know it's a special year for UNEA, but also a special year for us as civil society organizations, because we had to deal with half of the budget that we normally have for organizing this and also having people flying in or traveling in for UNEA. Can you give us some background information on that? Why was that? What were the other priorities, and why was our budget cut in half?
Yeah, well, this is an odd UN Environment Assembly. As you know, there was a time when the cycle of the UN Environment Assembly was changed. And so we ended up having it in years that were actually alternate to the years when the program of work and budget were discussed. At the last UN Environment Assembly, a decision was taken to return the dates of the UN Environment Assembly to coincide with the program of work and budget. So we ended up with a UN Environment Assembly 18 months from the last one, and the next one will be 18 months instead of 2 years apart. And so the big challenge for us with this UN Environment Assembly was that there was no budget for it. We had to find the resources for the entire UN Assembly, not just for the major groups and stakeholder forum, but even for member states who are unable to pay for those costs of attending the Environment Assembly. Normally, these kind of costs would be covered in the regular budget that we receive from the UN, but we do not have a decision from member states that says that these costs of convening a UN Environment Assembly should be funded from the core resources of the UN. And until we have that kind of a decision, we will always be in a situation where we have to find the resources from the voluntary funding that we receive. If we were to have a decision that said that the Environment Assembly and its subsidiary bodies are to be funded from the core resources of the UN, then the General Assembly would basically be looking at that and seeing whether they should be funding these kind of costs from the regular budget of the UN.
Okay, thank you. I think that was very informative. I think it's also quite, and we are not blaming you at all for that, but I think it's also quite frustrating to have an overview and to have responsibility for a budget for a rather small organization. I mean, 800 staff, I think. I don't know what the amount of staff is the WWF has. I think it's more maybe similar, and even the budget is maybe the same as a UN body. And I also think that it's the smallest UN institution or body with the biggest ambition and challenge, I think. But anyhow, I think I wish you a lot of success with that. We go over to the next topic, which is on the ministerial outcome documents. It's of course a very important document for all of us and for UNEA as well. I mean, it shows if the meeting was a success or not. And we have here Clarice Wilson. She works for the UN Secretariat, and I don't know what you exactly do, but at least I know that you were involved in all the drafting of the ministerial outcome document. I do remember the very first draft that was sent around also for consultation to the NGOs, and we received a lot of critics on that. I just checked the last draft. I think there's a lot of improvement. I hope that the NGOs were supportive on that as well. But please give us some insights on how this process works. Thank you.
Thank you, Lida. Just to explain what we do, we're just part of the UN Environment Secretariat team that supports the President. It's very much supported by the President of UNEA, who, as you all know, is the Minister from Costa Rica. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the process so far and where we have reached on the document and the type of inputs that we've received. So it began on the 6th of June with the President sharing an outline, and the intention of this outline was to collect what he described as bullet points on the elements of what the ministerial outcome document should contain. And he received a lot of feedback on that from member states, from stakeholders, major groups and stakeholders and other experts. Using those elements, the first draft, or what was called the zero draft, of the ministerial outcome document was drafted, and the President had expressed that he wanted a document that speaks to the people, that is not so insular in terms of, you've all seen the UN resolutions, they tend to follow a particular format and have this very clear style that we're all used to. So the initial feedback on that zero draft, which was sent out on the 30th of June, was that people didn't really recognize it. There were a lot of comments on that draft, also from NGOs explaining the type of things that they would like to see, and the President took that feedback on board, and all those comments were then put into the preliminary draft. I know there's a bit of confusion about the titling of the drafts, but it's all clearly laid out in the roadmap, which is also available on the portal. So that preliminary draft was also used for consultation, some within CPR. The President also attended some of the regional ministerial environmental fora to discuss with people in the regions, and there were also inputs from major groups and stakeholders. The final draft was then released on the 2nd of November, and this one was the draft that was translated into all the official UN working languages. There were also a couple of consultations on that final draft in CPR, in the Committee of Permanent Representatives, which took place on the 6th and the 14th of November. And we continued to receive comments after that. What the President then decided was to come to Nairobi a little bit early, to meet with regional and political groups before the open-ended Committee of Permanent Representatives. And this was a whole day of consultations, and on the basis of those consultations, revised the November 2nd draft so that we were a little bit more advanced, making sure that all those comments had been incorporated in preparation for tomorrow. And that is the draft that you will now see in the portal. I encourage you all to go to the portal if you haven't had a chance to look at it. All the drafts are there, so you can see the evolution from that very different communication style draft in the beginning to what we have now. All the comments are also there, so you can see all the comments from member states, all the comments from major groups and stakeholders, and see how they've been incorporated into the document. So I don't know if you have any questions on that.
I know that it's maybe you're not able to say so, but do you have some insights on some outstanding issues that are still to be discussed? I mean, without being political or keeping neutral.
That's an interesting juggling act to talk about it without being political or neutral, and not to preempt the president. I know you'll have an opportunity to talk to him on Thursday. So there are, a lot of progress has been made. There are issues that still remain to be discussed. A lot of comments, including from yourselves, on having a clear way of implementing the resolution, and you've just partially talked about that with the comments that Sheila made. Other issues are same as the last UNEA on how we look at common but differentiated responsibilities, how we look at transboundary pollution, and how armed conflict is contextualized in when you're looking at pollution and pollution resulting from those types of activities. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of expression that this draft is one that people can get behind, and there are just a few issues that remain to be worked out.
Okay. I would like to open the floor. Is there anyone who has a question? And again, I mean, we're not talking about content. I don't want to be impolite to my colleagues next to me. But, I mean, question for clarification. I see a hand over there, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Baki from Women Environmental Program, Nigeria. And you talked about the budget or the limitations you have in your budget which affects the implementation of the resolutions. What I want to ask is it not possible that the UNEP consider a budget line for implementation of resolutions, given the fact that every 2 years there will be a UN Environment Assembly, so that the Secretariat can follow up on the implementation of the resolutions?
Thank you. As I had mentioned, the challenge we have in the organization is that of the resources we receive, maybe about 10% of it is a given. Once it is planned, it gets materialized, and that's the regular budget of the UN. All the other resources we have, the Environment Fund and other earmarked funding, we mobilize. So you can have a planned budget for resolutions, but you still have to mobilize the money as an institution. Now, the risk with having just a new budget line outside the program of work will mean that we will have a program of work with its budget, and you will have a separate parallel process with resolutions, which means which one will take effect. And as part of the Secretariat, our big challenge then becomes, what are the priorities that the major groups or member states see for us? Is it the resolutions alone, or is it the entire program of work of which the resolutions should be a part of and should complement? And so I can see the rationale for having a separate budget line, but just be careful that we don't end up competing inside the institutions for which one is more important than the other, because member states and the major groups spend a lot of time. It must be, 18 good months of consultations about what the institution should focus on when it develops its medium-term strategy and its program of work. And then comes the UN Environment Assembly, and the idea was that you would either emphasize some of those things in the program of work or say, oh, there's an additional piece we want you to factor in, but that they would complement each other. if we end up with two separate processes, we risk causing a lot of confusion for the Secretariat, not knowing what is the priority and what takes precedence over in terms of the priorities for implementation.
A question myself, I was just thinking, which countries are the ones that are most generous to the UNEP? I mean, which ones are giving most the funding for UNEA? So which countries we need to lobby on that they start giving funding to UNEP and UNEA?
So I'm looking to see if we have our budget people here, but in general, we have maybe about 10, 15 contributors from among member states who provide the bulk of what the organization receives.
Of the 193 countries?
Where the organization is held up by about 15. And so the worry is a very narrow funding base in a way, or narrow group of countries funds the organization in its totality. And a big push from our side has been, can we get more contributors from member states who would be able to, even if it's small amounts, but would be able to widen that donor base and to be able to get a bit more resources so that we're not totally dependent on these same governments. Because you can say, well, those ones are giving us resources and we should pressure them, but their view is, well, why aren't we expanding it to the entire membership? The Environment Assembly, after all, is universal membership, but the funding, the contributions are not universal.
That's indeed a big challenge. Is there any other question from, sorry, David.
Thank you very much. I had a question about the status of the stakeholder engagement policy. So I don't know if now is the right time to ask, but no, I see Leila going, no, okay.
Now, I think we have, the next session is with the Executive Director, Erik Solheim, and then Thursday we have a session with the President of UNEA. I think there is the right place to raise this question, I would say. Is there any other question which is not on content? I know that we are not so used to that, but if not, I will just close the session and then we can keep on drafting our key messages. So if I don't see any other question, and I don't think there is one. Okay, one.
Hi, Jan Gustav Strondenes. I've been speaking to this audience before. I just have one quick question because I know UNEP has reached out to both the NGO world and private sector earlier to develop partnerships. And going back a few years, civil society and NGOs actually constituted a large part of the implementation of several of your program areas. Under the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOP, there's an ongoing work now on developing criteria for partnerships and PPPs, the public-private partnerships. Does UNEP have any kind of criteria for developing partnerships, or are you happy for any kind of approach to help implement your medium-term strategy?
So we do have a partnership policy in place that complements the UN Secretariat policy on partnerships. It does give us the space to be able to work with partners who can help us implement the medium-term strategy and the program of work of the organization, taking into account especially that among the major groups there are many who have the kind of reach that we, as a kind of institution we're set up to, we don't have that level of reach. So, and we have, as part of that partnership policy, there is a whole review process on the kinds of partners as they come in. So new partners are reviewed through the partnership committee. There is a more expedited process that has been put in place so that we become a more nimble organization as we look to partners, and they can be from the private sector, from the NGO world, the UN system, banks. You know, the types of partnerships are quite broad. And our medium-term strategy, actually the business model is based on partnerships. It is using partnerships to help to leverage more impact on the environmental dimension of sustainable development.
Is there any effort then to align this implementation with the totality of the SDGs, of several of the SDGs?
So that's a good question, because one of the challenges is we're not in control over the SDGs implementation in totality. Our ambition is to integrate environment into the way the SDGs are implemented and delivered by the whole UN system and broader than that. In fact, one of the recent discussions we've been having in relation to the high-level political forum is how can we look at helping the system to be able to say, is environment factored in ways that would allow these sustainable development goals to be implemented, not just business as usual, but factoring in the environmental dimension. Our medium-term strategy and our program of work is not enough to implement the sustainable development goals, not even enough to implement the environmental dimension of the sustainable development goals. So as an institution, it is something we're looking at right now as how do we organize ourselves to be able to feed the UN system and other players to help them be able to integrate environment into the work they do on development and not just focus only on our own implementation of our own strategy.
And does it help here that Achim Steiner is now the executive director of UNDP because they have more money?
Sure. Of course, for UNEP, that was a very, let's say, happy moment to see the executive director of the organization become the executive director of UNDP, because we know that environment will be part and parcel of what they do. And for us, that's an opportunity for partnership. It's an opportunity to see more institutions engage on environment, because alone, there is no way we will solve these problems. Our job is to be able to catalyze more change and to be, in a way, the seed for other changes to happen, and not to be worried about, doing everything on our own in little areas where we can have some good results, but it doesn't transform. You'll have seen a lot of work of, say, the Global Environment Facility or the Green Climate Fund, where they ask about transformative change. And it's a question we are constantly asking ourselves when we develop programs in the organization, does this change, is it really transformative, or is it at one little site and it's important for that location, but for UN environment, we need to be using the resources we have and the staff to really bring change that would transform a particular sector, a particular way of operating among the different sectors of society.
Okay, thank you. As I don't see any hands more, I'll just close this session, and I would like you to give a hand of... Oh, there is another question. Sorry. I didn't see you, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I just wish to ask the previous speaker whether UNEP can reduce the conditions for accreditation, because many organizations find it very difficult to be accredited, and if we need more participation, then the terms of accreditation of new UNEP has to be reduced. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's not a question, I think, for the program budget, but I think she just told me that they will bring it up with Jorge, because that's the secretariat, the part of the secretariat that is dealing with the accreditation issues. I think we can give them a hand of applause. I think it's a very difficult job, and I think it's in good hands as well. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
And I think we're now going for the next session, but we are waiting for Erik Solheim, because he will be in the next session, so I think you can have another health break or whatever. I'm not going to ask that you're going to shout or whatever. You can just relax. I just hear that Erik Solheim is on his way, so don't go away. Just wait here. You can just relax and check your emails or your Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But don't run away.